speaks into the mic. All right. This is the Bob World Builder BOBCAST, episode 8. And today, we're talking about goblins and stuff. I'm Bob.
I'm Grace. Or else.
I don't know what else. That's the real danger. That's why we have to keep doing this podcast. And so today, we're talking about goblins and stuff, but it's all inspired by a special gift.
A special gift from Bob to me. A book called The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Ammann that has changed my very life.
Your very Dungeon Master life?
My whole life. Because I've always thought of myself as being very tactically minded, but it turns out that I'm not. Because I had literally never considered most of the stuff that's in this book.
And you've read this whole book
I read
already.
the whole thing cover to cover.
What a nerd.
I know.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and so today, we figured we could probably end up doing a couple episodes, really, about great stuff from this book and obviously putting our own twist on it. But we wanted to start out with a simple one. Maybe not a simple one, but
It was the first one in the book, and really from, the first paragraph, I was like, oh my god.
Everything I know is a lie.
Everything I know is wrong and a lie. So, let's jump right in here. Talking about goblins and their tactics as discussed by Mr. Keith Ammann.
Mr. Keith is probably good.
Lord Ammann. So goblins are small and have low hit points.
Yeah.
And not a terrible AC, actually, but that's because their only good ability score is dexterity.
Yeah, so looking at the stat block here for a second, why don't we just share some of this? So their AC is 15 from leather armor and a shield that they're apparently carrying. They only have 7 hit points, which is 2d6 hit die if you go by hit die for some crazy reason. But they're fast for a small creature. They do have 30-foot speed. They're goblinoid. They're considered neutral evil. And their only ability score above 10 is dexterity at a 14.
Right. So despite this very obvious predisposition toward ranged or
Stealth?
Or finesse combat, though I guess scimitars are finesse, whatever, I have never even thought that goblins should fight at range whenever possible. And they should be going out of their way to make sure that they can fight at range. Because, as Keith Ammann discusses, they should be utilizing their nimble escape to hide every chance they get.
Yeah, nimble escape, basically a very roguish ability, allows the goblin to disengage or hide as a bonus action on each of their turns.
So, the direct quote from the book is, regardless of whether they hit or miss, the attack give their position away, so they must change it immediately, because they can. Whenever possible, a goblin must end its turn hidden, otherwise it's vulnerable. Because they only have 7 hit points, so one hit, chances are, is going to take out this goblin. Even from, level 1 adventurers.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good point, and I think that's why they're, a really common level 1 enemy. We see goblins in the first encounter of the first thing produced for 5e, the starter set. Goblin Arrows is the name of that encounter, where you're ambushed by some goblins right away.
Yeah, so, what does the book say that the goblins are supposed to do? Do they shoot from cover, or do they...
They get a surprise round, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, apparently, that encounter is, super deadly. I haven't played through it yet. Did you actually play through that when you did that?
Did, but I think our DM made it, wolves or something. No, there were wolves later.
Right.
But, I think we took out the goblins pretty easily. But the thing is, those goblins should, like, stay in cover the whole time. And they should be basically circling around the party in the trees.
Right.
So that at the very least, they have full cover.
Yeah.
Because
which
yeah.
Which would really just make it even more deadly, probably. Because I think, they do get the surprise round. I'm pretty sure it tells, you, the DM, to have the players all roll perception, or at the very least the goblins like roll stealth or something. It kind of walks you through how to set that up, but then still explains it as like, yeah, they're going to be able to get advantage on their attacks, which is pretty deadly for first level characters, and apparently has killed a lot of them over the years. But yeah, and then so directing them to continue to attack from hidden positions would pretty much just obliterate a first level party.
So that's the other thing about this book, is that when you actually use tactics like this for creatures like this, there are some creatures that, like, basically Keith Amon says, this creature is not really capable of
like the smarts.
Of doing anything particularly crafty.
Right.
Goblins, however, are very crafty.
Yeah, with a 10 intelligence, they're presumably as smart as any freaking commoner out there.
Yeah. And, they're willing to flee. Actually, they will definitely flee if things aren't going their way. But anyway, if you use tactics like this, especially against a party that is not very strategic...
AKA brand new players playing the starter set.
Yes. It can up, basically, the difficulty of an encounter to the point where people could die.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think at this point, it just tells you to use like 4 goblins as well, kind of assuming that you have a full party. This was kind of at a time where I don't think a lot of encounters were written as they often are now, where it's like, equal to the number of player characters, or equal to the number of player characters divided by 2. It just says a flat number, and I think it's 4, which having an equivalent number of these things attacking from hidden spots, again, against a level 1 party, is going to be pretty deadly.
So yeah, caution is advised sometimes.
Yeah, and if anything, like, a lot of people defend that encounter as being like, well, it's a really important learning opportunity for those players and kind of be on their toes. But right out of the gate, I feel like it's a little harsh.
Yeah. But then here's the thing. Like I said, goblins will flee.
True.
If there's 4 goblins and these guys, take out 2 of them, the other 2 are going to run away.
Right.
Especially because there's a whole, like, lair of goblins nearby, right?
Yeah.
They're going to warn the rest of them to set up traps.
Yeah, I feel like there's also pointers in there for what the goblins do and, like, how they react in the combat. I don't think it says they keep trying to hide, which is the recommended strategy from Mr. Keith here. But I do think it says that they will flee if there's only 1 left, or if there's only 2 left, I guess, or something. But what's interesting, too, is, like, when I think of monsters fleeing, I guess because I often only do, like, single monster encounters when I'm running anyway, I normally have just, like, a portion of their hit points in my head. Like, when they get to, like, 1/3 their health, this thing will try to flee.
Yeah, and that's actually what this book recommends. Mr. Amon actually gives you a number and says, this creature will flee when seriously wounded to X number of hit points, or sometimes only when moderately wounded, depending on how intelligent and
like vicious they are, I guess,
or how much they feel they need to preserve themselves. So he determines if a creature is evolved. If it's evolved, then it will have a much higher self-preservation desire than, like, something that is magically created, like a golem or something.
Yeah. Were goblins considered evolved?
Yeah. They're intelligent enough to have self-preservation instinct and selfish enough to leave comrades behind. Unless they are accompanied by hobgoblins.
Okay.
Who will order them to remain in combat. But once that hobgoblin's out, goblins are going to split.
Yeah. And not to keep, like, pulling from starter set, but in that module, they're Not in that attack, but later on they're led by a bugbear, right?
Yeah.
Clarg.
Yep. Arg.
Yeah. You can tell I've been reading this a little bit as I gradually plan on running this with Grace at some point in the future. But and I'm totally going to kill you with these goblins.
No, you won't, because I know the strategy. And I understand the concept of a readied action.
Yeah. And that brings up a good point. You know, goblins are kind of a trope. You know, the goblin ambush, I think it's used as that first encounter because it's kind of like a fantasy. I don't know. It's like something you expect, maybe. Maybe that only has really been bumped up with 5e because so many people have played through that starter set encounter. But I feel like being ambushed by goblins or, oh, my family was killed by goblins is kind of like one of these tropes. So would a lot of characters have knowledge of these goblin tactics?
I would say if you do have that basic, my family was killed by goblins, my whole village was slaughtered by goblins, my tribe was slaughtered by goblins. If you have witnessed goblins slaughtering an entire tribe / village / family, you would know that they're going to fight this way, because that's presumably how they might have done it, though if you know it was like an arranged attack on something, it wasn't arranged by the goblins, it would have been arranged by a higher, more intelligent goblinoid, like a hobgoblin.
Yeah, so are they not smart enough to really plan, you know, or really coordinate such an attack themselves?
I would say goblins, I don't remember exactly what Keith Amon said, but I feel like they're more of the lie in wait, see what comes along type of individuals than a seek out an established village and attack.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because if like you're saying, like they know they're weak. If anything, I guess what they would do, which is why this all kind of keeps like circling around, is establish themselves around some village. They would just wait by the road for somebody to leave or somebody to come in
stragglers,
instead of trying to attack the whole thing. I guess, unless like pushed to do it or paid to do it by somebody else.
Yeah. They lack the training to pull off something so large scale on their own. But speaking of larger scale attacks on established communities, the other very common beginner monster humanoid that a group might fight is orcs.
Yeah.
And orcs, as described by Keith Amon, are brutes.
Yeah, and I wanna look them up here in the good old monster manual we have before us as well. Get some good page flipping sounds here.
Yeah, we're gonna start an ASMR channel soon that's just us flipping through the monster manual and then whispering the name of the monster. We're gonna do an all ASMR version of Who's That Dungeon?
Oh no. So orcs, lower AC than goblins. They only have a 13 with their hide armor. They have 15 hit points though. So like twice the hit points, same speed, obviously medium sized, but less intelligent, a lot stronger, more dexterous. Oh, no, less dexterous. And a little bit higher constitution.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Orcs are fearless. Like another great thing that Keith Amon does is he takes into account the flavor text.
Good.
So it's not just looking at this stat block, it's looking at, in the D&D canon, how do these creatures behave?
Yeah.
And then how do we use that behavior to create this strategy that they would use.
Yeah, and so typical D&D canon, I feel like, kind of hinted at in the stat block here. These guys are chaotic evil, whereas the goblins were neutral. So they're just kind of like, they're just wild, man.
Yeah, so orcs will attack an established village.
Yeah, because I don't know, to me, like, the chaotic alignment really just implies, like, impulsivity.
Right.
So they won't bother, and they don't necessarily have the smarts to think through it with this freaking 7 intelligence score.
Right. So I'm not saying that it would be a planned, well-executed attack on a village, but, commoners have like 1 hit point, so it's not super hard to slaughter an entire village.
That's true too, and I feel like this is kind of a good representation, like the difference between a goblin and an orc, of like what hit points is supposed to mean too, because it is also including like their will to fight, which is something often overlooked. Maybe he brings it up in the book.
Well, he says, quote, "Orcs are brutes. They charge, they fight hand to hand, and they retreat only with the greatest reluctance when wounded. Being fanatical valuers of physical courage, orcs, unlike most creatures, are willing to fight to the death." So that's true. In this book, most creatures, they will flee. Things like orcs are, they are obsessed with their honor and courage. So it's better to die in battle than it is to flee.
Yeah. And I guess that, all ties into the lore of orcs being not long-lived generally, but not because of a naturally shorter lifespan, but just because they are so reckless, I guess.
Yeah. There are no old orcs.
Although at some point, back when I was doing some research on orcs for actually what was the first podcast episode with Matt Perkins, and we talked about orcs after that whole like Twitter debacle, I was watching a video from either Chris Perkins or Mike Merles, and he was saying that like he imagines like the orc tribes of having some elder orcs who do kind of like run things. Because otherwise orcs would just basically like be this fast burning fuse that goes out.
Yeah, I think they talk about that in Volo's guide somewhere. About how like overly reckless orcs are also not high standing in society because they die so fast.
Right.
But
so even though they like really value strength, there's still like a smaller subset of orcs who really like maintain the society. For your purposes as a DM of throwing some orcs at a party, they're kind of a monster that I guess is almost run in a way that like people kind of want to run every monster or are inclined to run every monster.
Right, like
where they'll
me
just stay in the battle,
book.
fight till they die. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an easy way to do it. In a way, it's almost like that's sort of a player mindset too, of like, yeah, I'm just going to use my best attack and, sword with my sword until the thing is dead. And that's kind of like what orcs do, except with great axe.
Yeah. And, orcs are one of those creatures where that doing things that way is in their best interest. But there are other creatures where, they could just sword with their sword, but Keith Amon opened my eyes to the fact that, sometimes they should take a turn to do something else.
Yeah. And so whether you're fighting some orcs or some goblins, of course, it doesn't have to be a fight, right? If this is some impulsive attack from some orcs and they're just coming at you hostile, yeah, it's going to be really hard to try to talk them down, basically, and find out what they want, because they might just want to kill you. That might be the whole goal. But something that was officially introduced in Tasha's is this concept of parlaying with monsters, which is how we do often play, I feel like. Our parties pretty much always try to talk first. And then when talking fails, fight.
Not anymore. Not when I'm evil.
What do you mean? After reading this book? You're just evil now?
No, I'm talking about our campaign in Icewind Dale.
Yes. Rhyme
evil
with the
now.
Frost Maiden.
Anyway.
Yeah, so...
Cut that part out.
So, I'm definitely going to keep the now that I'm evil part. Because your grace roll destroyer. Yeah, so there's no specific, okay, here's how you parlay with orcs, or here's how you parlay with goblins and Tasha's. It just has them included under humanoids as a subtype, or as a type of monster. And this section is pretty bare bones, so yeah, in a minute we're going to see what Mr. Keith might have to say about it as well. But Tasha says,
the desired offerings for humanoids are promising to find a lost item of great importance to their culture. Do orcs really care about that? Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Goblins maybe, because they like loot, right? They like treasure.
That's true. Goblins might like treasure. Challenging them to a type of friendly contest, such as dancing, singing, or drinking?
Yeah, right, Tasha. What the heck are you thinking?
What about recovering something they've lost? That could work.
Yeah.
Or information on a foe's secrets or weaknesses. To an orc, everyone's weak.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's probably the closest you can get for an orc, though.
Right, but
Um,
I don't think orcs really care for exploiting specific they do only
Yeah.
have an intelligence of 7.
Right. I mean, that's the whole problem. Because literally, it's like, what is that, right? That is intel. Orcs with this low intelligence don't care about information
Right.
that much. So maybe not.
Keithamon says you could try to parlay with the orcs. If you try to persuade them, he recommends disadvantage because they are very stubborn and got their heads in the sand with that low intelligence. He says you could try to bluff past the orcs.
This might be what
It
I was
says-
thinking. Like,
Yeah,
go ahead.
he says with disadvantage. But, orcs aren't very smart.
Yeah.
You probably could give them a plausible lie.
Yeah, at
And they
least a
might
normal
believe you.
roll. Because, yeah, like, they're not going to want to listen. So I think that's why he's saying
Right.
disadvantage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if they're going to be so easily deceived, then yeah, maybe that would cancel out and just be normal. But what I was thinking when he brought up bluff was that is this just like an incredible but kind of false show of strength?
Well, the last thing that he recommends is attempting an intimidation check,
Right.
which would probably be the thing that the orcs would be the most likely to respond to.
Exactly. That's speaking their language.
Right. Though it's possible that in attempting to intimidate them, you only egg them on by saying, I'm so strong. And they'll be like, well, if you're so strong, if I can beat you, then that means I'm stronger.
Right. But then at least, kind of connecting to what Tasha's thing was, if you can convince them to agree to like a duel,
Yeah,
something
like a
that's
one-on-one
it's more of a
duel.
compromise, right? It's like, okay, yeah, we're still going to try to kill each other, but just less.
Yeah.
Just less death. Less people involved. I feel like that's probably a good compromise. And I don't know, maybe toot my own horn here a little bit, but that's kind of what we did with Dragon of Icefire Peak when you guys dueled like 5-on-5 those orcs in the woodland manse. You remember that?
Yeah. That didn't go super well for us, though.
Well, you lost one companion, but they all died.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah. And that was just kind of my way of, well, first of all, I didn't expect you guys to I don't know what I expected, I guess, but that was kind of like
We approached it more
improvised.
peacefully than you expected, I think.
Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, just kind of went with the idea of like, okay, they're very focused on their honor, and their honor is based on strength. So if they can be bested in just a flat out fight to the death, then the rest of their people will see that as something to respect.
Yeah.
So we talked about goblins. We talked about orcs. Little fun fact I wanted to throw in here was that in the lore that they come from in Lord of the Rings, they're just the same creature.
Huh.
There's different names for it. Orc is just like Elvish for goblin or something. I might be getting that a little bit wrong.
Gorkblins.
Yeah. Orbs.
Goblorks. Goblorks.
So if you're running some goblins, we need to have them hiding, right? Like if
Yeah.
the goblins are, unless the goblins are somehow being surprised, like your players just stumble into some cave that a bunch of goblins did not expect anyone to come into, the goblins are going to be the one getting some surprise attack. Because they attack from hidden positions with ranged weapons, and then they keep trying to hide. That's what goblins do.
Yep.
And if they start getting beaten, they will run away. And they can also disengage as a bonus action, so they're good at that too. Orcs, on the other hand, will come out of nowhere, flailing their great axes.
They'll come very quickly because of the aggressive trait.
Yeah, bonus action can move its whole speed up to the creature it can see, so they can just get right up in your face.
So they can just dash for fun.
And I guess that's what they want to do, because javelins are...
They'll come quickly, get up in your face, and stay up in your face until one of your
you
faces
dies.
is not attached to your head anymore.
Yeah, I like that. And something that I guess is another thing to consider here while we're wrapping this up, in a more modern perspective of treating all these monsters, because let's remember that both goblins and orcs are playable races too. and linking this back to that very first episode with Mr. Perkins, you can treat these as individuals as well. So these traits that we're talking about for an orc could totally just be mapped onto any other humanoid. Same goes for the goblin. Like, these are strategies that you can use for really any monster. They apply to these ones just based on the stats, based on the lore that they have. But feel free to, in your own world, use these for anything.
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom, Grace World Destroyer?
Keep destroying.
I'm going to let it slide this time. We talked about these destructive little guys.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everybody.